Well, welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed lunch break. My name's Rob. I'll be chairing this last session of the Southwest ARG meeting for this year. Our first talk is going to be from Ethan Henderson from Cornwall Reptile Amphibian Group, and he's going to be talking about use of social media, the triumphs and pitfalls. So over to you, Ethan. Just a reminder as well, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat or the Q&A. Thank you.
Nice to meet everyone. I'm Ethan. I'm the Secretary and Social Media Officer of Cornwall Reptile Amphibian Group. So the CRAG social media platforms, most amphibian reptile groups, I think all of them, have their own website, which is used to give members of the public and members themselves details on events, how to join, and future activities. But one of the problems with that is people will have to already be aware of it to actually go and access that information, or they have to be typing in very specific things such as, for example, for CRAG, Cornwall reptiles, or very specific things that might not be in the general public's range, and that means that we're going to be missing out on people who might be interested. So originally I started with Instagram. It all started with, I found a picture of I got a picture of an adder, and I messaged Nicola because I couldn't find Cornwall Reptile Amphibian Group on Instagram. And I thought, there's a great opportunity for us because we can then represent the reptiles and amphibians of Cornwall. And then that further moved on to using Facebook and Twitter. Instagram and Facebook I often use as sister sites. So I'll post on Instagram and then they'll go through Facebook. Twitter being separate, you have to do your own posts. And then we're also using Zoom and YouTube, which is allowing us to make videos. I'll get further into that as we go along. So Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, the purpose of using these social media platforms is, one, they're the most popular. So you're going to attract a wider audience, and it's to increase the awareness of CRAG and their other activities. So using these applications, I am always in contact with members of the public, volunteers, and members who may not be active at the moment. One of the benefits of using this social media platform is we're able to use images. So these will attract members of the public. If you have a post with great information on, but no image, a lot of the time people will just scroll past it, unfortunately for us, but that's where I then will go on to using Facebook to obtain and share images. So when I first became an Instagram manager, I thought, oh, well, this is a great opportunity. And only after a few weeks did I realize I need to be able to get images of local native species. I'd prefer it always to be Cornwall. But that I first thought that might be quite difficult. So using Facebook for our groups, if whoever's your social media manager, if they go on the Facebook search and type in wildlife photography with the name, so Dorset or Devon wildlife photography, I presume there'll be Facebook pages. There's plenty for Cornwall, and surprisingly, they actually do get quite a few sightings of reptiles, but they're not aware of CRAG. So every time someone posts a picture of a toad, snake, lizard, I'm there straight away introducing, saying, hi there, I'm CRAG. We'd love to have access to your image. We'll credit you as a photographer, and if we do use it in any form of publication, you get credit. And that there, if that then introduces them to CRAG, and then I always ask them, do they submit their sightings to any database, which is then I can introduce them to record pool and increase our sightings that are getting recorded as well. So one of the difficulties of managing social media is you need to create a schedule for your content, and that does depend on how much time you're going to put into it. So I post about 4 posts a week, 4 posts a month, once a week, and this allows me to plan my schedule, but it is quite taxing. So if you're a smaller group or you haven't got the time, you don't have to post 4 a month. You can post once a month, like a monthly newsletter. But it just helps create content and therefore create awareness, because post-COVID, a lot of groups have went inactive on social media. So then when people are searching for them and they see an account that hasn't had any access in months, they think, oh, they must have disappeared. They mustn't be active anymore, and so they don't interact with the group. So then once you've got your pictures and your posts ready, this is mostly for Instagram, but I've seen a lot of people using very, very specific hashtags. So as an example, hashtag Ade or Viperoberus, Ade gets about 55,000 so far hashtags on Instagram versus only like 15,000 on Viperoberus. And this is an important point because when we have projects that are quite specific, so for example, grass snakes and grass heaps, if you type in hashtag grass snake, you'll get quite a bit. But if you were to type in hashtag grass snakes for grass heaps, there'll be fewer than 100 because no one's going to be hashtagging that. So when you're using images, you want to get people interested in your content, but also make it relatable. So nothing too specific. If you see an image, I always ask permission to use reptile and amphibian sightings, because they're quite cryptic and small. It is a bit difficult compared to birds or mammals. So anytime I see a good image, I'll always ask permission to use. And then with our social media schedule, I like to have a mixed use of scientific and hobby posts because we're all interested in reptiles and amphibians in the ARG groups, but some people are a bit more general. Some people are a bit more into the scientific study of it. So you want to be able to create a content schedule that's fitting for everyone. And by doing this, you should generate interest from the content, and therefore people might be interested in joining the group. I've noticed once I started becoming active on social media, you could post a picture of an adder, but then someone else will message you straight away saying, oh, I found these tadpoles. It's just creating content, creating awareness, and getting people interested and wanting to get involved. Then throughout the year, because of COVID-19, we had a bit of difficulty not being able to have any in-person events. And this meant that we had to make our meetings online, which was great though, because that means everyone could get there and you could even record them so people could watch them if they weren't able to be present. And then we also hosted some online talks with some of our members. So Bex, who you heard from earlier, she had a talk. Alice, our former secretary, she's done a talk. And it also allows us to then put these talks on YouTube so that people who can't watch them at the time are able to view them later. And that's another platform there that we now have a presence on. YouTube's not our biggest one, but we are growing and there are future talks being planned at the moment. But also having these social media platforms, so Zoom and YouTube, you'll be able to generate your interested projects. So we have a few sites that are at the moment being changed. So there's possibly a cycling route being attached to one, which was a concern for some members. That was then used for a talk by Dr. Stephen Green, our scientific officer, and that got members involved. And then on our social media platforms, I was then being contacted saying, how can I get involved and what can I do? So the triumphs, we've managed to remain active despite postponed events. Unfortunately, every time I've managed to take over a social media account, it's been during COVID. I haven't had the pleasure of practical events in a while. We hosted 2 photography competitions. This allowed us to get more images and get people involved. And it did increase our members. So a lot of the people who were taking photos weren't actually members. They were just people who enjoyed photography. And then we've now created an archive of images. So now that when people ask if they have any images of newts, frogs or toads, snakes, we have got a database there for them to use. And it's increased submitted sightings to record pool, which is great because if a species is unrecorded, it's not accurate about the information we know of them. So some of the pitfalls though of social media managing for ARG is that each social media platform has a different use or audience. So Twitter, it's quite small, got to be quite precise. Facebook and Instagram, you're allowed to put more text in, which is great. Facebook allows you to do posts without images. Instagram, you need to have an image. Does not benefit members who are not online. Unfortunately, some people just don't want to be online. I can understand with the years that we've had recently. It's difficult to get images during a winter period. That was one of my concerns I think last year, but I remember, I think it was January or near Christmas time, I was tempted to put a happy Christmas post and then just leave it at that till the spring. But we seem to have reptile sightings throughout the year, which was great. But the only problem when I get to asking if people have submitted sightings to record pool is I can't confirm it. And a lot of people don't actually know what record pool is. So in Cornwall, we have ARGs, which is with Cornwall Wildlife Trust, and a lot of people submit their sightings there. And then people seem to have issues of sharing data, not sharing data, but they think, should I have to use this one and then use another one? So if people don't want to use record pool, I do say that as long as you're submitting your data, it should go further and then we will get access to it later on. But these are some of the pitfalls. So how on earth do we manage to get through these pitfalls? On social media, I'd recommend that you don't spam content. No one wants to go through a newsfeed and find 15 posts in one day by one person. It does make people want to unfollow you, but you should also keep a regular schedule. So if you do want to post once a week, keep it at a week. If you can only do once a month, keep it at that. Collect permission for images. So once you've got an image, whether it's been some shrub clearing, a toad, a picture of someone who could be used for a talk, just get the permissions and then you can plan for your future posts and keep your viewers updated. So I think during the photography competition last year, we were a bit stalled on getting them judged, but by giving out a post once a week and just saying to people, oh, we're hard at work, we're still getting going, and we will keep you all updated, people are happy to wait, and it means that at least they know what's going on with the group as well. So some of the insights, especially on Instagram, it seems to be people love frogs, toads and snakes, but slow worms are often unrecorded. So a lot of the people who I speak to, they'll show me a picture of a frog and I'll say, oh, that's amazing, submit it to record pool, can I use your image? And then a lot of the times they'll say, oh, I do get loads of slow worms in my garden. Are you actually interested in that? I always say, yes, we're interested in everything. So it seems to be that the people who have access to slow worms, whether it's the fact that they're just common, not interesting to some people, but a lot of people on social media, slow worms aren't actually the most popular of our native species. But then palmate newts are our least seen amphibian. So I've aimed to get every species that we have in Cornwall in the database, but palmate newts seem to be the least, either whether they're recorded, not photographed, but they're just the least amount in there. And people are keen to get involved in the group, but they're waiting for the restrictions to lower, because as wildlife people, we are practical people. We like being outdoors. We like getting our hands dirty. So people are waiting, but we have to wait for the restrictions to lower. Any questions? If you haven't got any questions at the moment and you'd like to email me later on, my email is just down below at ethe94@gmail.com.
Thank you for that talk, Ethan. That was really good. We've still got plenty of time for any questions. Nicola obviously noted in the chat that sometimes it's important to be flexible with social media as well. So if there's anything that's topical or relevant news that's just breaking, then rather than waiting till a gap in the scheduling comes up, it's good to post it as it comes up. So having some responsiveness, I guess, as well is quite useful. Oh yeah, so it's I just meant with a schedule, just sticking to something so people can keep regular posted. So even though I say one post a week for myself, if there's something that comes up, I will do another post. It's just to keep the account active and keep generating interest. I did forget to mention though, let's go back 1 second. So social media is always evolving, and I've been asked by a lot of people to try and get into TikTok. Now, at first when I got asked this, I didn't think it would be able to be done, because I thought all my work's done by images and TikTok's actually video. But a lot of people have been using Reels, which is just images
a collage of images with music, or even TikTok stuff. So there's the amphibian tadpole girl who filmed tadpole growth on TikTok, and that's one of them that I do need to start getting onto because it's quickly rising in popularity, and a lot of the members of TikTok are younger people. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram's great for like 18 plus years, but a lot of the TikTok users are quite young. So there's a gap in the market that I don't think any amphibian reptile groups actually tackled yet, is TikTok. But I have had some plans of trying to get it. It's just formatting images and content for that as well. Any questions popped up?
So Chris Monk just mentioned that sometimes it's difficult with the hashtag for slow worms. The dash doesn't work, so you either just get hashtag slow, hashtag worms. But I know from my own experience, what you can do is just capitalize the first letter of each word and remove the gap in between. And capitalizing those first letters also means screen readers can pick up hashtags better as well. Otherwise, you end up with a very long, confusing series of words that merge into one another. Also, worth mentioning the fantastic series of YouTube videos that CRAG has got. I know you did mention them, but I suppose if someone could pop a link in the chat to anyone who hasn't seen those, there's been some really good talks in that series.
Link to our YouTube as well for you. I think that's got our previous talks on there for you.
Fantastic. And I guess one question for me really would be, have you had any issues, I don't know about yours, but in our Facebook group, probably about 60% of people would try and join the group and post, don't read the rules and try and post about exotics. Any tips for keeping things on track?
We've had someone post about they had a cage that they were just trying to give away, and I just advised them that we are a reptile amphibian group, but we are native species. So I just redirect them to any exotics. But it is a concern because obviously there's loads of people into herpetology and amphibians, but they're all about the exotic side. And there is a gap there, like you said, about trying to get people into natives. If they all love the frogs and toads, we've got some here.
Yeah. I found one useful tool in the Facebook groups is that you can turn on. You can turn on the thing where you basically have to authorize people's posts.
Mm-hmm.
So,
we haven't had any. No one seems to have done that with CRAG though yet, but there's always the concern.
Yeah, I guess it also depends on how different groups have got their Facebook group set up as well, whether they're public and whatnot, that sort of thing. Any final questions before we move on to the next talk? Angela Julian mentions that TikTok was mentioned in the Scottish meeting last month, and it's possible to make short videos that could be posted.
Yeah, so I've been thinking on Instagram, there's one popular trend for wildlife groups where they have like facts. It'll be a question and a fact. So it could be possible of just compiling images. Let's say, for example, the life stage of a frog, get a picture of a tadpole, juvenile to an adult, put a little pop-up text in there. I think music's always necessary just to give it a bit of a positive vibe, kind of, so it looks a bit quite fun. But it is, so there is that possibility. It's just trying to make it interesting and effective because I've never done it before. So I'll be asking if there's any younger people who know how to work TikTok, that'd be great. I now understand how my grandparents feel about Twitter and Facebook.
I guess also you need to look for sort of royalty-free music and things as well for these sorts of videos. There is one final question in the chat from Peter West. It says, we use Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, but find Facebook to be our fallback and don't always keep up with the other two. What would you think is the better platform overall for public engagement?
I would say Instagram used mostly because you can post it onto Facebook. So it does save you time instead of having to post two separate posts. Twitter, you don't get that much communication from the public. But Instagram and Facebook, Facebook mostly, you get most of your messages from. So I do get Instagram, but a lot of the time it'll be pictures. And then on Facebook, that's when I'll get a question saying, hi, I have pheasants in my garden, what can I do? That kind of questions. So I post on Instagram, but then I think you can, if you link your Facebook and Instagram, the messages both come in the same one. So it'll kind of saves you time if you put them two together.
That's great. All right, well, thank you very much for your talk, Ethan. If anyone has any other questions, then please do put them in the chat. And Ethan, if you can respond in there if there is anything else. We'll now move on to our next speaker, our last speaker of the day, which is Nadine Wöhl from Jersey Zoo, or Durrell Wildlife Conservation Trust. Nadine is going to be talking about a decade of head starting and 30 years of conservation effort for the Agile Frog in Jersey. And I'm a bit biased towards this talk because I've had a hand in this project as well at some point, so I'm looking forward to hearing it. Over to you, Nadine.
That's all right. Well, I guess thanks for inviting me along. I guess the reptiles, amphibians on Jersey are a little bit of a novelty for everyone on the southwest of England. So yeah, there just seemed to be a lot of interest in the Jersey Agile Frog project. So I was just invited along to just talk about that. So I just hope you find it interesting. So as the title says, we've been doing a decade of head start in tadpoles, so raising from spawn to tadpoles and then releasing back into the wild. And we've been doing that seriously for about 10 years, a bit ad hoc before that, but overall we've seen the species have around 30 years of conservation action on the island. So a little bit about the frog. It's one of the brown frogs in Europe. You don't have them in the UK. But they're fairly widespread throughout Europe, and they're usually associated with wet meadows and deciduous woodlands. And as you can see from the photo, it sort of distinguishes itself from the other brown frogs with that really long hind leg length. And in a lot of the translations for the frog, you tend to find them called the jumping frog or so just exaggerating that they have very long legs and jump very far. So, like I said, in Europe, they're widely distributed. The IUCN categorizes them as least concern, but they tend to be very specialist habitat specialists in that link with the deciduous woodland and wet meadows. And then often within their ranges, they also compete with all the other amphibians in Europe as well, including sort of the common frog as well. So in Jersey, they're at the most northern edge of their distribution, obviously not coming across into the UK. But then in terms of our local area, they're actually classified as critically endangered. Numbers are fairly low, and obviously the project has been ongoing for a while. In Jersey, though, there's a slight difference in that instead of finding them in wet meadows and deciduous woodlands, we find them in heathland. So this is sort of the starting situation that we sort of working from then. So this is our lovely island. Originally, historically, they were found widespread throughout the island. And then by the 1970s, they were declining. And from the 40s, they were declining. And in 1970, there was only 7 locations left on the island with agile frogs. But unfortunately, by the 80s, we only had 2 populations left in this sort of southwest corner of the island, at Wainé and at Noirmont. And then unfortunately, due to a pesticide spill in 1987, we lost the population at Noirmont. So we have 1 remaining population left on the island. And in some of the years after that, spawn counts were done, and there were a few years through the 80s where there were actually no spawn counts detected from the agile frogs at Wainé. So efforts started to around that time. That same time to help the agile frog on the island. So it's been a collaboration of a lot of organizations over the years. So we have the Agile Frog group, as it first was when it all started, that morphed into JARG later on, which was the Jersey Amphibian and Reptile group. We are partners with the local government of Jersey, and then there's some local organizations that have been involved in terms of the Society Jerseyese, HSBC for funding, obviously amphibian and reptile conservation, and the DICE, the University of Kent as well. And so early on, there was lots of newsletters drawing their attention to the Agile Frog project, and sort of trying to get sightings on them and get a lot of public awareness involved with the project. So as I mentioned, one of our big partners in this is the local environment department with the government of Jersey. So their main role in this is species protection. So many of the sites that we do find the Agile Frogs on are sites of public interest, special interest. But unfortunately, we do see a lot of public access, but they do try and manage this as sympathetically as they can. They're also obviously involved with the wildlife law, so species protection. They've been involved with developing the species action plan over the years. They also do the annual in situ species management and habitat management. They run the monitoring of the species. Oh, and I mentioned the habitat. So in terms of the habitat management, the government of Jersey, they manage the ponds. So whether they need to be deepened or reprofiled, a couple of the ponds are actually in willow cars. So we get a lot of leaf litter falling in there, which subdues the plant life, and obviously the light getting to the bottom of the pond. So every periodically over the years, they will reduce that layer of detritus from the bottom of the pond as well. And what seems quite crucial for our Agile Frogs here is some spawning anchors. So every year they go out and they put fresh spawning branches, which are fresh willow, cut willow, and then they anchor those at the sides of the ponds, and the frogs tend to really like to spawn on those. When they spawn, they're a little bit different to our common garden frogs in that they don't sort of spawn, and the spawn can be seen on the floating on the top of the water. What you actually find is they anchor them to the vegetation at the bottom of like midway through the water column. So the spawn is quite submerged in the water. The states of Jersey also are involved in the habitat management for the wet meadows and the heathland management, trying towards corridor creation and maintenance of those. Obviously the willow car is quite important habitat for them with us, so it's managing that as well. In terms of sort of outside of the habitat management, we're also involved. We have a lot of ducks on the island, so we do monitor those. We do have to deal with invasive species, plant species in particular. So we do have some issues with cressula at some of the ponds and azola. So occasionally they may have to step in and try and address those. A couple of the ponds, intermittently, we might have problems with rats, and so they're involved with dealing with those as well. And from the surveys that we do, we might also involve protecting the spawn. So sometimes if it's not securely fastened to some vegetation and it starts floating, then we will try and protect that spawn, whether it's placing a willow branch over it, placing it in netting, in cages, or some sort of enclosure. But over the years, we found that obviously the smaller grade that the netting is, the worse it is for the tadpoles. So it's pretty handy now that we can just buy like those big nets that fishermen use, that we can just try and anchor the spawn inside those in the bottom of a pond, and that seems to work really well for us. So in terms of the species monitoring, this is run by the government of Jersey, and in the spring, so usually from January for us, because they're usually out quite early, until April, we start surveying for the agile frogs. The Jersey toads, the crapo, they tend to come out a few weeks before the agile frogs, so they're usually out at the early January, and then given a couple of weeks of their spawning, then the agile frogs tend to be seen as well. And yeah, so that's usually around January to April. We do 2 surveys a week. Usually I'm involved in one of the surveys as a volunteer, and organize volunteers that come and help on the project, on the survey routes. And then the second survey is covered by the Department of, by the National Environment. And we also follow an evening survey with a day survey once a week, so that we can carry out any management that needs doing on the spawn in the daylight. During the surveys, what we'll do is we'll count any spawn, so mark up any new spawn, mark those on a map. In terms of measurements for the spawn, we'll measure how far away from the edge of the pond they are, how deep they are in the total water column depth, and then the depth that the spawn is in, and then we'll monitor the condition of them as the weeks go on and as they start developing. As I already mentioned, we'll protect the spawn that might be vulnerable to predation from the ducks, and also maybe from dropping water levels. And overall, we monitor 4 sites on those evening surveys. The whole Wainé population is sort of classed as 1, but once we move to any of the other sites, then we sort of involved in making sure that we take precautions against disease transmission between those sites as well. And not just disease transmission, but also the transmission of those invasive plants as well. And every now and again, we may have to change our survey routes because of the plants, because obviously we don't want to track those into into ponds that don't have them. So I'm going to take you around some of our ponds now. So this is the North and South Canal in some willow car. So this was a survey from a couple of years ago where the pond was quite popular that year. On the left-hand side of the bottom photo, you might see some canes sticking out of the water. So these are the markers that we mark the spawn with, and each one of those will have a label on it that will, which will relate to the date it was discovered, and then all those measurements I told you about as well. This is another pond from Wainé. This is one we call the Sump. This is our most favorite pond for the Agiles in Jersey. These 2 photos are actually the same pond. This is in a low water level, and then this is in a high water level. So we get quite considerable variations from year to year in the water levels on the ponds. The Sump is actually a favorite. We have the one side full of dwarf willow, and they absolutely love to hang out in there and spawn on those branches coming through the water. And then this is one of these, this is Noirmont, which is the site with the pesticide spill in 1987. We started reintroducing tadpoles into this pond in 2008. And annually after that. It's a very ephemeral pond. A couple of months after these photos were taken, there'll be no water in this pond whatsoever. And you might be able to spot in the photos towards the top, we put some wildlife acoustics, acoustic recorders in the trees. This is just to see that Noirmont seems to be a bit of a weird site in that we don't see a lot of spawn, and we don't see a lot of spawn increasing, and we don't tend to hear the frogs calling either. So we just thought we'd try and put the acoustic recorders out just to see if we can get some recordings of frogs, and if this can some way add to our knowledge base and our plans for the future in terms of trying to figure out, get an idea on the male population of frogs in the area. So obviously we use the spawning the clumps of spawn as a proxy for breeding females, but it would just help with the future and planning if we had an idea of how many males were in the areas as well. So in terms of, this is going into the head starting now. So this is what I've been involved with for the last 10 years. I've taken a little bit more of a lead role in the last 5 to 6 years. This goes back to pre-2008. So when we were doing the head starting in aquariums at the back of the department, and we did that a few years for quite a number of years, but obviously it was much less, we had much less control over this, and we also released the Agiles as metamorphs. So we had to deal with that whole metamorphosis change on the tadpoles as well, and then start feeding the frogs for release. So it's quite time consuming. But then in 2008, we received a shipping container, which is dedicated to the Agile Frog project. It's kitted out for how we need it, and it is only used for that. So it's a completely biosecure unit. We have water that's filtered going in. We can treat water on the way out if we need to, but obviously there are local species, we don't have to worry about that. It's completely climate controlled inside. And I'll go into showing you around in there as well. So it just meant that we could standardize a lot of the head starting, and it's proved really beneficial for the project. So this is inside. We have 2 rooms, one small room, one large room, 28 tanks in total. There's each tank contains around 200 liters of water, and we will start setting this up around 2 to 3 months before we start potentially receiving the spawn. So actually it's something that we'll be doing sort of in the next 4 or 5 weeks time if we go ahead with head starting again next year. So just gives you a little overview of our tanks. So they sort of, each one incorporates the filter. So we have the sectioned off with the bio balls and some filter wool, a pump transferring the water from that into the main tank, and then the water moving through back into the filter system through a mesh to try and get rid of some of that detritus that builds. And then once a week, they generally get a really good overhaul and a clean and a partial water change. And what's really important when we start off is getting the plants in as well, so that the whole system's up and working and the algae starts developing on the tanks so that the tadpoles can graze when they once they start hatching. So once the tanks are more established, they start to look a bit more like this. And obviously I've got a photo of some spawn that arrived that's looking really healthy and already started developing. So in general, we tend to take in about 10 clumps of spawn a year. This usually equates to around 4,000 tadpoles, maybe 5,000. As I mentioned, after they hatch, they start grazing on the algae on the tanks. Once they start depleting this, then we start supplementary feeding them with fish flake. But as they grow, obviously the clutches vary in size, and we found over the years that approximately 1 tadpole per litre is really adequate for what we want in terms of growth rate. So that means we aim for around 200 tadpoles per tank. So as they start growing, we start splitting them out so that we achieve that level of number of tadpoles between the tanks. In some years, we have had emergency situations where there's been little rainfall and the ponds are all low, and we've actually taken in as much spawn as we can. In this situation, obviously, we go above this level that we find quite adequate for the tadpole growth, but that just means that we still have to keep going with that idea of splitting them around 200 tadpoles, but it may mean that the releases will start earlier just to reduce the population of the tadpoles within the container that we have. And they usually released at a gosner stage where they have good back legs and they're just about to sprout their front legs, and that's when we optimally find is best to release them. But as I mentioned, if in emergency situations and depending on numbers, we may release them early. So this is a release, so it's quite an effort to get everything backed up. and move to the sites. It's get quite a lot of people involved in that. And once we get them there, we need to acclimatize the tadpoles to the water temperature and then start mixing them with the water from the ponds. And then eventually sort of we'll release them. And we'll do a number of releases through the season because we have a few sites and it's impossible to do them all on a single day. So we've actually taken advantage that we're a zoo, we have students, and in terms of the head starting, it is quite labor intensive. So we quite often have a supply of students through the years, and we can utilize those. So we, with them being overseen of usually by me or my boss, then they take the lead role in the day-to-day husbandry of the tadpoles. And then they'll also use that time as to work on a project, to develop a project that will benefit the Agile Frogs as well. So this is something that looks great on their CV, that they've had that role of responsibility, and obviously they're getting the project out of it. So it does really well. And it goes to their degrees, their undergraduate projects, and it also helps us tailor the husbandry of the tadpoles. So this is where one of the projects have worked in our favor, and we found that optimum tadpole number for our tanks, and sort of we use that then as our standard baseline for the head starting. Through DICE, we've also had a number of PhDs and MScs done as well. So again, this just helps us tailor what we're doing, and in terms of the release and the animals in situ as well. So in terms of results, we now have, we've released in 3 additional sites, as well as the Wainé main population. So we have those new populations starting there. And I'm sorry, the picture on the previous one was the front cover of actually Rob's report, data analysis report on many years of tadpole data. So some of the conclusions from that were that the tadpole releasing of tadpole head-started tadpoles have actually resulted in the increases of numbers of spawn clumps counted. So that it shows that the head starting has really been working well. And then in terms of numbers, you can see that the head starting actually has worked. So you can see the increase in the number of spawn clumps found after the releases, the number of spawn clumps that we've collected over the years. So this highlights the years where we might have had to collect more because of the environmental ranges of that year. And then also the resulting tadpoles that we've released. And again, taken from Rob's report, the main consequence of this is just showing that in 2 to 3 years from the release of the tadpoles, we are actually seeing increases in the number of spawn clumps in the field as well. So another indication that positive in the right direction for the population on Jersey. So the recommendations from Rob's report was that they considered Wainé now to be at carrying capacity. So actually it's a picture of Wainé on the bottom there, so it's quite a small site as well, but with a number of ponds on it. So there's approximately thought to be around 200 specimens there. And then they decided that we would stop any releases of tadpoles at this site so we can enter a monitoring phase just to confirm whether it looks like Wainé is at carrying capacity. We still harvest spawn from Wainé because of the numbers of spawn counts are very good. But these tadpoles then will really be released at our focus ponds at Noirmont and Beauport, and some smaller ponds at Le Creux and Woodbine Corner. So from Rob's report, he recommended that we investigate the use of the garden pools in the area around Wainé. We investigate a little bit more about the terrestrial habitat and the distance of migration, and then the connection between the breeding sites of the Agile frog. Conduct a PVA to identify population size at each site. In terms of chytrid fungus, we're not doing very much about that at the moment, but it's something that we do want to increase, we want to incorporate and have a routine checking for that. In terms of research that we've managed to do over the years, so as I mentioned, with the students doing their BScs, we've had somebody look at the effects of diet and temperature on the growth rate of the frogs. We've had someone look at the effect of population density on the growth rate of the tadpoles. And we've also looked at providing cover for those tadpoles and seeing that if that affected the growth rate and whether density had an impact on that as well. In terms of research through DICE and one of the local universities on the island, we've had someone look into the ecology and conservation of the Agile frog. In terms of trying to look at the success of the head starting, we had someone looking at the impact of the visible elastomer polymers on the tadpoles. So identifying the best place to mark the tadpoles, and the mark remains after they metamorphose, so that we can look at that success rate. We've had someone look at the relative success and difference of the conservation strategies for the frog, and that was mainly dealing with providing the protection in terms of the nets and the grades of the nets. And also we've had somebody look into the dispersal of recently metamorphosed frogs on and the impacts of for their reintroduction. And in the recent sort of the last 2 or 3 years, we've had somebody do the PVA for the Agile frogs. We've had somebody look into, going back to 2012, we had a student do a BSc for the creation of a habitat suitability index for the frog on the island. And this was repeated in 2008 around Waynay to look at those gardens of the houses surrounding the ponds, to look at where we might be able to, what ponds we might be able to utilize as satellite ponds for them. And then in terms of future and moving the project on further, the habitat suitability analysis is going to be taken further, in that we're going to use that as a baseline to gather data for the Agile frogs in Europe, and see if there may be habitats in Jersey that equate to that may be better sites for the release of the Agile frogs on the island. So it's unsure whether in Waynay they're actually restricted there because that's where they were restricted to, but it's actually sort of suboptimal habitat for them. So if they had optimal habitat, how would they do? So it would explore that question. We also need to approach looking at updating Rob's Agile frog data analysis research, so add in the last 6 years of data to that. And then hopefully in the next year, we'll be looking at doing a new action plan meeting to sort of review the old one, update it, and incorporate any of the new research into the project as well. So yeah, I think that's sort of an overview of our Agile Frog project on the island and the collaboration with the people that we work with. And that's our view as we go to do our surveys, start our surveys in the evenings. So I'll be getting that in January.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Nadine, for that. We do have one question at the moment in the chat, which is from Angie. What do we think the population of the Agile frog is now? Sorry if you already mentioned this.
No, I think I mentioned that they think the carrying capacity at Waynay is around 200 individuals. The PVA that was done sort of 2 years ago is pretty much in agreement with that as well. But in terms of the other sites that we've released at, it's not so clear, which is why it would be really interesting to move forward with looking at alternative sites to release the frogs and to see if they do better with them in those areas.
That's great. I had a follow-up question to that really as well, is do you have in mind any personal preferences over sites you think would be good target sites for future translocations?
Yeah, well, the island has changed incredibly over the years, and we've lost a lot of the woodland to agriculture and potatoes and things. But there are still nice chunks of woodland remaining. I mean, you, Rob, will know sort of the area a little bit more. But there's sort of Murray Valley on the north of the island, which is quite a nice dense areas of woodland. There's a stream running through, which would give us the opportunity of potentially developing some pools. There's some woodland around Bonnyrigg, and it gives us the opportunity to work with some of the local NGOs as well, like the National Trust that are quite large landowners. And the Bonnyrigg site is a National Trust owned, so potentially that gives us that collaboration. And once again, it has quite nice woodland, quite nice edge habitat. And then St. Peter's Valley is quite wooded as well. So yeah, it would be really interesting to try this small scale and see what the results are.
Excellent. Got a couple more comments and questions. So Ethan just mentioned that perhaps with the captive setting of the tadpoles, be a great opportunity for recording them and making some interesting social media posts. I don't know if maybe the zoo's already doing that at all.
Not really. I'm not very tech savvy, so I haven't gone into that, but he's absolutely right, because they're very endearing. And everyone there probably knows doing night surveys is quite amazing and quite humbling. So it's quite amazing to have that opportunity, and they are incredible, and everyone's fascinated by tadpoles. So yeah, it would be cool. And it's time dependent as well.
Sure, yeah, you have to get the Zoom media team on it. And
yeah.
Final question from Carol: are you trying to restrict them to Jersey or to possibly introduce them to the other Channel Islands?
I'm not sure that they were actually if there's evidence that they were on the other Channel Islands. I'm not sure that there is, so it would just be Jersey. But it sort of gives us a lot more opportunity to delve into some research in terms of habitat, environmental change, and climate problems, with it being at the edge of its distribution. There's just lots of interesting things we could do with it, and the fact that it's classified as least concern at the moment, but is more of a specialist rather than a generalist. The implications of that, maybe long term, looking into this, it would be beneficial for other species as well.
Yeah, because I think some of the other Channel Islands have common frog instead.
Yeah,
whether or not they're native is a bit of a grey area as well.
Yeah.
Also, you mentioned future research. I'm just plugging myself shamelessly here, but we have got a book chapter coming out sometime imminently as well, with I think data up to 2018. I think that we analysed in that one.
Okay.
So we've been waiting for that to come out for quite a long time, but that should be out at some point in the next few months, hopefully, with some further updates on the work. That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Nadine.
Hope you all enjoyed. Thanks for inviting me.
And general question: since the pandemic, a lot more people are creating ponds in their gardens and local communities, a bit like the Bug Life's Beelines, which is like a connectivity network. Is there, or could there be, an online map for public to place their pond habitats, as fragmentation and connectivity is an issue?
I absolutely love that idea. Several years ago, one of our members, Andy Smart, suggested that we map all the ponds in Cornwall. Why not just take that nationwide? I'm not going to volunteer to do that, by the way, before somebody puts me forward for yet another task, but I think that's an absolutely brilliant idea. I really like that idea.
Discussions about mapping ponds before, and it's the data you can access that contains the most up-to-date pond information normally is the Ordnance Survey data, but it's very expensive and it updates every 6 weeks. Other data, well, it's again the same problem with turnover of ponds, and even trying to identify them from aerial maps. A lot of them are obscured or very small, and don't show up on maps. So there is a lot of trying to get a perfect map. A census map is almost impossible, but certainly you can get some way to knowing where existing ponds are and start to work from that. In terms of sort of individual placement, I guess, obviously if it's in someone's garden, then obviously it often just depends on where people have got space and where it gets a bit of sun or isn't shaded out. But in the wider context of the landscape, then it is useful to sort of view that, I guess, in context of local amphibian populations and other ponds, because really what you want is a meta population of lots of ponds that are all supporting the amphibian populations and other wildlife, really. Just catching up with comments. So suggestions that you can use the My Maps function in Google. Yeah, that's quite a useful tool for quickly creating your own sort of customized maps. I've seen people map things like all the zoos in Britain using them and made public maps and all sorts. So that's definitely an option. Pete Gillett saying events don't have to be big, elaborate affairs either. Small targeted sessions can be effective. Gemma agrees that's a good idea. Pete Gillett, yes. Oh yeah, on ArgWeb you can map ponds on there. So actually those using ArgWeb, you can add your ponds into ArgWeb if you want your own pond map. But yes, you may, Peter, that's a good point. You may well end up sort of getting to the point where there's so many ponds on the map, people don't know what, you know, which ones to survey or which ones to consider, because there are a lot of ponds in the landscape, but probably don't realise how many. And Lana, been trying to put all the ponds in Norfolk on the NARG portal. Hard to be able to map all of them, especially if they're private gardens or farmland. Yeah, good point. And also not just considering ponds as well. Obviously, there's various types of water body that support amphibian life. Many of the local farms on Ordnance Survey no longer exist in West Sussex. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. And Pete has just shared, I think, an image. It's his view of all the ponds in Hampshire, and there's a lot. Unsurprisingly. Okay, well, we are now running out of time, so we'll have to go to Angie's slide. Sorry, Angie.
Okay, so just massive thank you, actually. Can I say massive thank you to Nicola, to Ethan and to Rob for chairing, and a very massive thank you to all our speakers, because you've all been absolutely fantastic and the talks are of such a high quality, and I really feel we've all learned so much. It's just been an incredible day. And finally, a big thank you to all our participants who joined us for the day and helped to make this a successful online Southwest Regional meeting. So thank you all.